Hello, everyone. In this particular video, or set of videos, we're going to go back and kind of readdress the whole idea of creating test plans, okay? Uh, and in doing so, we need to enhance what we have done before. I created this little Word document to kind of review what we talked about with test plans. And you guys have actually already been tested on this, I should say, and you did pretty well with it. With that said, when we sit back and given a set of pseudocode, one of the things we need to do is identify all the paths. Then we create the test plan for each path. And for each test case, we should have the inputs and the expected results that we should see from those inputs to our outputs. We should then test our logic and our pseudocode to ensure that we're meeting those expected results. And then we should write the program based upon our pseudocode and finally test our program with those test cases to ensure the expected results that we got from the test cases. And in doing so, we can ensure that our program works 100% of the time. Up to this point, we've done that, and we've done that pretty well, and it's actually been fairly easy based upon, a very straight and narrow type of pseudocode. In this case, I'm looking at very boards here. When we sat back and we said identify the paths, well, because we were just going straight down with sequential statements, in this case, we had one path, all right? And that works out pretty well. And so again, when we sit back and we said, okay, with this case, we got one path, and I have a test case, and here's my inputs, and this is what I should be getting based upon my own calculations in my head. I can hopefully ensure that I meet those results based upon the steps in which we took to create the outputs in that particular piece of pseudocode. That's all well and good. And again, fairly easy. And I introduced this a little bit early because I like the easiness of it. Well, now things are changing, right? They've changed a little bit now that we got into conditional programming. So now when we sit back and we look at conditional programming, let me pull this up here, sorry. Hit the right button here, I'll get it for us. We go to VB Auto Center and we look at the pseudocode here, which we have reviewed before. Okay, let's see, there we go. We sit back and we see now things have not changed, we have changed. And what has changed? Well, what has changed here is the amount of paths we now have. Because now when we sit back and we walk through this, it's not top down, it's not sequential statements. We actually are asking questions. And based upon it, if the answer is true or not, we do one thing. If it's false, we do another thing. Meaning, if they wanted a sound system, then we do this. If they didn't want a sound system, we do nothing. If they wanted leather, we do this. If they didn't want leather, they would do nothing. Same thing for navigation. If they wanted pearlize, we would do this. Else, we would ask the question, do they want it finished? If they wanted custom finish. If they did, we would do this. Else, we would do nothing, meaning it was basically standard. And then the rest of it, for the most part, is straight through. That path stays straight. And so these are paths, and so we need to test to ensure that every path has been tested. That is our goal when it comes to being a programmer. We want to ensure that we have done this absolutely correct, okay? Again, I don't know if I mentioned this in the previous video or not. I've had some experience with this coming out of college. I would sit back and I would test my program, but I didn't really have a plan in regards to testing my program. And inevitably, because I didn't have a plan, I basically would test, the paths of least resistance, I would say. I would test the paths over and over again, the same paths. But inevitably, I would miss a path just because I never really had a plan. And those paths that I actually missed somehow didn't work when my users finally started testing my program or using my program. That became quite an embarrassment. And so next thing I know, I would test, yeah, they wanted a sound system. Yeah, they wanted leather. And maybe, yeah, they wanted navigation. But I would never test if they didn't want leather. I would forget to do that. And though this is a pretty simple example, when your programs get more complicated, forgetting to test a certain path could potentially create an error if we never test it. And I'm going to tell you, I experienced that in real life when I handed my program off to my users to actually use or to test in this case. And they came back down saying, hey, Bob, I did this. And next thing I know, it didn't work or it didn't work. And I would look at them going, huh. And really what the problem came down to was I didn't test the path. I didn't really think about it because I never really sat down and wrote out test plans before. Inevitably, I got lucky and got a new job at a good company that basically taught me how to test effectively. I was never taught how to test effectively in college, but I started realizing that that was really wrong, that I should have been taught how to test effectively, and that's what I'm doing here for you. By learning how to create these test plans, we can ensure that our program absolutely works, and we don't have to worry about a user doing something that we did never planned on. Does that make sense? Okay. So again, we started this process a little bit with one straight and narrow path when we were doing only sequential type of structure. Now we have this if structure, we have to consider all paths. So what I want to do now in this particular video is talk about what's a path and how do we identify it. So in this case, I guess my question would be to you, how many paths do you think we have? Take a guess. I don't know, scream it out. Maybe I'll hear you, who knows. So how many paths do we actually have? Well, it's really, it's arbitrary what that final number is, but we need to make sure we test every path. And so what I mean by that is when we go down, obviously we have one path that goes all the way through. But really what we're doing is we're going to walk in and we say if sound system. This is the fork in the road, right? If what a sound system, I'll either go down one path if it's true or another path if it's false. So in this case here, I'm going to, let's see, do this for myself. I need to identify the paths. And in this case, this is path 1, meaning the true is the path 1. So every if condition has two paths, true or false. Even in this situation here, even though we don't have an else, it's an assumed else. Remember that, assumed else we do nothing. That would be a path also, and we want to make sure we test that. I wanted to make sure that stayed red, and it didn't. Apologize for that. Let's see, let's go down here, try this one more time. There we go. And that would be 2. This one would be 3. I'm not sure I'm going to succeed in what I was trying to accomplish there. This would be 4. This would be 5. This would be 6. This would be 7, okay? So again, the true side. So this is 1, 2, meaning true or false, true or false, true or false. These are all each pass. So far I'm up to 7 pass. The else in this case would be 8. Does that make sense? Okay, the true side of this one would be 9. The false side of this one would be 10. There we go. I can type it. There you go. And then the rest of it is still all part of each one of these paths. So in this case here, I have, if you can see, I'm going to try to highlight this a little bit. And maybe we'll just highlight it. And that will be, we have this as this path here. Oops, didn't want that. We have this path here, number 3. We have 4. I hit that correctly. There we go. We have 5. We have 6. We have 6. We have 7. We have 8. We have 9. And we have 10. Again, so how did I come up with these? Well, basically what I did was, as I sat back, let me get rid of that then, every if condition has 2 paths, the true and the false, 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 the else side here, the true and the false. I didn't put one on the end if because, again, these right here were basically the assumed elses. We can pretend the else was in there. So it's either the true after the then or the false after the else. In this case, it's assumed else, so we stuck them there. So we literally have 10 paths in this particular program. So what you need to do is after you write your pseudocode, this is why I implore you to write your pseudocode similar to how I do it, okay? So it's very easy to identify the paths. Every if condition has 2 paths. So in essence, if we had no if conditions, we would have 1 path. That would be the only time would be an odd number of paths. But in this case, when you have an if condition, you always should end up with an even amount of paths. In this case, it's 10. You might sit back and say, well, isn't this a path? Well, it is, but when we check off one, and so on, it will go through that path. That path is kind of assumed in this case. So path one will take care of testing all of that also. So every one of these paths will take care of testing this path here. We don't have to really identify it. If that makes sense. Meaning it's this part right here is part of every path through here, right? If I said true here, false here, true here, eventually we'll walk through here to get our expected results. Does that make sense? Okay. So what I want to do is I want to make sure you understand that. So the first thing you should do now when we sit back and we talk about this is when we talk about creating our test plan, okay, identify all the paths. Let me get this back up here. We're going to identify all the paths, and that's true now, okay? That makes more sense to you, or should make more sense to you in regards to when I say identify all the paths than what was before, because we only had one. So this is what I mean by that, identify all the paths. All you do is look at your pseudocode, find every if condition, and every if condition should have a true and a false. And in this case, like I said, even this situation right here, we have a nested if. It's still a new structure there, so it have a true and a false. Does that make sense? Okay. Our next piece we would do is create the test case for each path. This is where it gets fun, all right? What I'm going to do is I'm going to end this video so you have a nice idea of how to identify your paths. And we'll come back in the next video and we'll create the test case for each path. And you'll be interested to know how many test cases will it take to actually test them all. This is where this methodology really comes in handy because it's not as many as you probably think it is. And I'll show you how to do that in the next video.